Awesome, Bill. As always, appreciate your time. I know you and I have the luxury of having multiple conversations per week and have known each other for a little over a year, maybe almost 2 years now, but tend to really get along and kind of share the similar mindsets in terms of being efficient and how to kind of conduct ourselves in the world of business. I myself, just since I've been really looking into a lot of success psychology, I am a big fan of kind of military-esque type of discipline and mindset. And I thought that you would be a good person to kind of talk about or talk to with certain topics because the overall theme of the podcast, which I'm kind of improving over time and getting better and better each conversation. But I really want to try to talk to people who I think have wisdom that the younger generation can learn from. And then try to put it into more kind of, simplified best practices for either, young adults, but any adults really to kind of take and then, live life in a better mood and hopefully more fulfilled. But again, appreciate your time and take it from there.
Sounds good.
Awesome, man.
So,
So if you don't mind, yeah, giving like a quick kind of intro summary of yourself, and then we can kind of jump into, your early military experience.
sure. Well, my my background is I joined the Navy when I was super young, and did 17 years in the Navy. Had some
Hmm.
amazing experiences, and then got out and realized I had to reinvent myself. And so, as a civilian, and that was a huge transition for me as
Hmm.
far as going what I want to be when I grow up, and that was a big challenge there. So it was going from that being in my late 30s to going, what exactly do I want to do with my life? And then
Hmm.
being able to transition what I had in the military to that and basically rediscover my identity. I think that's the
Hmm.
biggest challenge I ran into was losing who I was because it was the title of a thing I did. And I
Hmm.
find that in a lot of people. And these days, you have to be able to recreate yourself again and again and again as technology changes, or with AI and Chat GPT out there. There's
Hmm.
always things that people need to be able to adapt. And that was one thing that was a hard challenge for me to kind of learn there. But I've had some amazing experiences working from the regular Navy all the way to supporting the U.S. Navy SEALs. Now, I like to clarify, I am not a Navy SEAL. I don't want to be called one. I don't want someone to call, uh, say, hey, is this guy a SEAL? I am not a SEAL. I just had the privilege of supporting them. They have experts in each field, whether it's logistics or
We'll call you a sensei.
yeah, right. So I'll be very clear because no one should ever steal valor or take credit for something that amazing men like those do every day. But I had the pleasure of just being in their presence and supporting them, and that was awesome.
Hmm. And how long were you in the military? Because I believe even after you got out or you were working full time in the military, got out, but then we're still doing either partial work or kind of we're still involved. I'm still learning the process
No,
myself.
no. Yeah, no. So I got out after 17 years, and that's a whole nother story in and of itself. My ex-wife was getting half of my retirement, so I decided to get out instead of stay and retire because I had a
Mm-hmm.
son that was born, and I was working in special forces at the time, and just decided not to do the next deployment.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys were eager to go over there, and I decided to stay home and be a father, and kind of went that path. I was also having some problems with my back and things of that nature, just due to virtue of being a paratrooper.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
uh,
what, because you mentioned that you jumped in at a really young age. Do you mind
mhm,
kind of walking through like how old you were, what made you want to go
sure,
into the military? Maybe we'll start with that.
sure. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and was born in New Mexico, raised in Los Angeles, and I was born to two hippies. And both my parents were against the war in Vietnam. They were
Hmm.
adamant about that. But my grandfather had served in World War II,
Hmm.
and my grandfather was very much very dark version of John Wayne. He's very Spanish, but very if you think of John Wayne, that's kind of the archetype right there. And there was a lot of patriotism in my family. It was funny being raised by hippies because hippies are like, hey, anti, like, fear the government, right? And my
Yeah.
parents were always that way. They go, don't trust the government, fear the government, but love the soldier.
Hmm.
You know, they
Interesting.
didn't believe in, because they understood the concept, which I think it's lost by a lot of these mass hysteria or media, right?
Hmm.
Oh, it's the police's fault or it's the government's fault or this, so sometimes the mob mentality tends to punish the one individual. In the
Hmm.
military, your job is simple. You follow orders. You
Hmm.
do what you're told.
Hmm.
And I mean, yes, there's lawful things that, if someone tells you to do something that's completely unlawful or just darn right cruel or against Geneva Convention, you absolutely have to refuse that. But then you also
Hmm.
have to articulate that, right? But all in
Yeah.
all, 99.99, I've never given an order that I've completely outright refused that was an illegal order, right? Something
Hmm.
uh, that was just inhumane. I was never
Yeah.
given that. So you follow orders. So if they say deploy here, right, and fight these people or set up these defenses, that's what you do. So my parents
Yeah.
understood that. So they always loved and raised me to respect the military. And I grew up with my grandfather telling me stories about the military and the men that he served with.
Hmm.
And I just always knew that I really wanted to uh, serve. And I looked at them as protectors. And
Hmm.
growing up, I was relentlessly bullied as a kid. I
Hmm.
was uh, I was a little bit slow uh, learning stuff due to some challenges when I was born. I was a breech baby, and they came with the forceps and they messed it up my neck, and so I learned slower than other kids, and eventually overcame that over time.
Hmm.
But kind of just dynamics was established, and I was just a sweet, nice kid that was relentlessly bullied,
Hmm.
and I got tired of that. And as I got older, I was frustrated, had challenges with my family growing up. Mom was awesome. She worked hard, took care of me. Dad struggled with alcohol and other drugs
Hmm.
recreationally, and he was
And this
really
is
high
the
functioning.
60s, 70s, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure. So I was born in '72.
Hmm.
So, and my parents were young. My mom was like 20, my dad was like 23.
Hmm. Kind
And
of typical from back then, though.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there was a lot of struggling with just substance abuse that runs in my family. It goes
Hmm.
on and on. Alcoholism, multiple generations and stuff.
Hmm.
So I was born, was a big surprise. My parents loved having me.
Hmm.
Uh, I was raised as an only child. My dad had a son with a previous marriage, but I never really saw him much. And uh, so I grew up there, and I remember growing up around drugs. I remember growing up around alcohol and seeing things and stuff. And the biggest thing that it taught me is it taught me that I didn't want that.
Yeah.
It really put me on a straight uh, to be a rule follower, straight laced, right? Like, no, that
Hmm.
there's right and there's wrong. There's things that you do.
Hmm.
And so between the messages kind of that I got about drugs and how it messed up things, and then along with the me being bullied, made me realize that I didn't want to do drugs,
Hmm.
and I didn't want anyone to go through what I went through with the bullying and stuff. And so I always wanted to kind of help and protect people where I
Hmm.
could.
Hmm.
But that also took me finding confidence because I didn't have a whole lot when I went in the service. So my dad struggled on and off with substance abuse through the years. And then what basically happened is that my mom stayed with my dad because she wanted me to have a father around.
Hmm.
And then at uh, there was one particular instance that really just floored me was when my mom asked for the divorce, and my dad was fighting it and came in drunk. And I was living in the mountains north of Los Angeles. We had moved up to a place called Pine Mountain,
Hmm.
and uh, about an hour and a half north of LA in the mountains. And I had a shotgun, and my friends and I would go quail hunting and stuff like that. And one night my dad comes in, and I can hear my mom crying uh, in the living room,
Hmm.
and she was pretty upset. And she goes, Bill, my dad's also named Bill. He goes, put down the gun, put down the gun, put down the gun. And I remember that, and I adored my dad more than anyone. And I stood up, I got my shotgun, I put a round in the chamber, and I went out in the living room and I lowered my gun to my dad's chest and told him he needed to leave.
Hmm.
And that was probably one of the
Jeez.
hardest things I ever had to do because he was one of my favorite people in the world,
Yeah.
but I had to
And you,
protect my mom.
I was going to say, yeah, it's almost the need to protect your mom clearly outweighed, just how you felt towards your dad. I mean, that's a wild incident to go through.
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty tough. So there's actually a good end to that later on with my relationship with my dad, but I'll get to that later.
Hmm.
So the so at that point, of course, the marriage was over. Dad
Hmm.
was gone, and my mom was trying to figure out how to raise a teenager, and she didn't have the money for my dad, and she's waiting tables, and I was out doing my own thing. I was out with my friends. I was looking for a mechanic. I
Hmm.
was drinking. I was drinking a lot, but I wasn't
Hmm.
doing anything super bad. My mom called it pukey, and uh, uh, smoking weed, doing those things. But
Hmm.
I refused to do any hard drugs of other stuff. And uh, I was about to turn 17, and my brain I wasn't thinking right, obviously.
Hmm.
I was about to turn 17, and I was so tired of mom telling me what to do. And she goes, I'm like, you know what? As soon as I can, I'm joining the military. I wasn't doing well in school. And my mom's like, well, what do you want? What branch? I said Navy. So I think to kind of whip me into shape and give me perspective, she took me to the recruiter's office on my 17th birthday. And
Hmm.
at that time, they were accepting people at 17 because the baby boomer generation had just gotten out of their reach for recruiting purposes. And so my mom had to sign the documents, and she goes, "Let me sign it right now. I don't care. Just let me sign." And
Hmm.
so they let her sign. And then over spring break from school, I went to spend the time with my dad, and I was processed all the way through. They call it MEPS, Military Entry Program,
Hmm.
to be, to be screened for the military. Signed my contract, and when I came home, I said, "Well, I'm leaving for basic in uh, 27 days." And my dad didn't want me to join. My
Hmm.
mom just wanted me to have somebody that was responsible because her biggest concern was that I was fighting her. I'm like, I want to go live with dad. But dad was fun. I could party with dad, and dad was dating girls and all
Hmm.
this, but that wasn't a good place for a 17-year-old. So
Yeah.
she figured it was better to have me in the military than to have me hanging around that negative environment. And
Hmm.
to be honest with you, I was pretty straight laced and I didn't want to do drugs and this and that, but I was on a slippery slope. Like I could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And because all I wanted was connection and just a group, right? A sense of belonging.
Yeah,
And
especially at
so,
that age, a lot of humans at that age, that's when they're most impressionable, and then boom, once they turn 18, they have all this freedom, right? And if you make
yeah,
continue to make bad choices with all this freedom, who knows where you're going to end up.
yeah, yeah. So my logical thinking was I was sick and tired of my mom telling me what to do, so I wanted to join the military and be my own boss.
Hmm. Kind of sought
And,
that
and, and
independence.
right, and I got a rude awakening the second I got to basic training. But
And is that
but
why is that exactly? Just because they're kind of slapping you into shape, and I know you're no longer your own person once you immediately jump into boot camp, right?
oh no, no, they tear down your everything you know about yourself to build you back up into a sailor.
Hmm.
So I was thinking that I'd be in the military and have a job and be my own boss. What I didn't realize is how much the military kind of controls your life.
Hmm.
For the first, 6, 9 months, they control every single aspect, which is what I needed.
Hmm.
So, and I'm so glad I did because I had no direction. And I
Hmm.
think if anyone just doesn't have direction and don't know what to do, and they can't stay at home. I couldn't stay with my mom, and I shouldn't stay with my dad, and I
Hmm.
didn't have any job or skills. I mean,
Hmm.
the military is awesome when you don't know where you're going or what you're doing, because it helps that.
Yeah.
I joined, and it was a rude awakening, but I really struggled. I had a hard time in basic training. I had a hard time adjusting. But just
Hmm.
the thought of my grandfather and what he would have said, he had passed by then. What he would have said had I not adapted or done what I was supposed to do would have was a huge pressure on me.
Hmm.
So I finished basic training, and then I I went to in the Navy we call it A school. It's basically military occupational skill training. I went to that in Lakehurst, New Jersey, where I became a aircrew survival equipment, or basically a parachute rigger. We packed parachutes, took care of oxygen systems, uh, uh, flight gear, things of that nature, life rafts, life preservers. And
Hmm.
then, of course, there was, if once you got to a certain rank, there was a special subset group where you could go and support the Navy SEALs and learn how to parachute jump. But that was many years uh, later.
Hmm.
But
Did you choose to jump into that specific role? I know that you're limited on, choice in terms of what you can or can't do. Were you just thrown into that team or department, or?
yeah, that's a great question. So when you're processing through, you have to take your they test you, Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, to see what you're skilled at doing. And
Mhm.
then when they offer you a job, they weigh that against what the needs of the military were. At that
Gotcha.
time, it wasn't long after Top Gun had came out in high school, right? And
Yeah.
they offered me parachute rigger and said I would work on airplanes, and I was
Mhm.
like, done. That's perfect. In retrospect, I would have probably, if I knew what I knew now, I would have probably chosen a different job. It could have been in aviation or not.
Mhm.
But, being a parachute rigger is not a very marketable skill in the civilian world.
Mhm.
So I would have been smart about that. They also sell a lot of young people on, oh, well, you go what's called undesignated, and then you get to pick whatever job you want. That's not true. You basically get to do, paint the side of the boat or do whatever, crap job,
Yeah.
and then you can try to get those particular jobs, but they're not guaranteed. And I think a lot of keep in mind, military recruiters love them, but they get sent to sales training school. Their job is to sell you.
Yeah.
And there were some things that when I joined that I didn't realize. They're
Mhm.
like, you'd have two stripes in 9 months. That's true. But when I thought of stripe, I was thinking the big navy red chevrons, right?
Mhm.
Which is like E5. No, they gave me like these little tiny matchstick things, and I was like an E2, right? But it's not their role to fix my bad assumptions.
Yeah.
So, uh, I mean, if there's one thing I could tell someone considering joining the military, go with somebody, any branch of service. Any branch
Mhm.
of service can go and negotiate any branch. And I do this all the time for people that I know, my friends. I'm like, hey, my kid's thinking of joining the military. Great. Let me go with them, right?
Mhm.
To talk to make sure that they don't get in a situation, because once you sign on that dotted line, the Navy has to follow their part of the contract, or the military, and
Yeah.
you have to follow yours. And if one of you breaches that contract, well, then the other one's, oh well.
Mhm.
People don't realize that if you join, and there's a lot of tiny things about that, but you need to know the specifics. And I think a veteran is the best way to go. I
Mhm.
don't care if it's an uncle or a stranger. Reach out to someone you don't know, but join the military without having a veteran there to help advocate for you, because they just know things that you don't know from their experience,
Yeah.
is you're rolling the dice.
Yeah. It's the
So
same thing in the corporate world, right? Like having a
yeah,
mentor, you can hopefully not make the same mistakes that they made, and not reinvent the wheel at the same time. So that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. So I let's see. So I did that time. I did time on the USS John F. Kennedy. I was stationed in an aircraft carrier, which was amazing. It
Mhm.
was a lot of fun. I was there for 3.5 years, and during that time, we got deployed to Desert Storm. We had uh, we had returned from a deployment, kind of like a small goodwill tour to New York and Boston and different things. And we're supposed to go in the shipyards when Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq.
Mhm.
And then we had offloaded like all of our stores, all of our like testing equipment and stuff when Saddam decided to invade Saudi Arabia.
Mhm.
So they, I was supposed to go home for my dad's wedding and be his best man, but they canceled my leave, and within 4 days we reloaded all that equipment and refilled all of our storage on the whole
Mhm.
ship. It's like 18-hour days putting everything on there, and just It
Preparing
was like a
for
chain group.
battle, basically.
Yeah, preparing for deployment. And then
Hmm.
we deployed with no idea when we come back. And it was 9 months later we came back, which was
Hmm.
cool, and came back right around my 18th birthday, and
Hmm.
that was fun. And then I at that point I transferred on to a Naval Test Warfare Center in Maryland,
Hmm.
and at that point I'd grown up a little bit. I was a non-commissioned officer then, and I was starting to have leadership. I was having leadership roles
Hmm.
and learning a lot. And one of the things I love about the military in my first 4 years is that I made a lot of mistakes. You
Hmm.
know, I was young, I was stupid. I just there was always somebody looking out for me
Hmm.
and really guiding me along the way. And so, I mean, unless you're doing something super bad, it wasn't that big of a deal to really find your own place and uh, and grow up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, well, a few things that come to mind because something that I had no idea up until I really started looking into a lot of the benefits of the military. So I actually didn't even know that one of the original purposes of the military was to almost socialize a lot of the young men out there, right? So if
Hmm.
let's say you're growing up, I always thought that okay, I live in San Diego, there's no way I want to leave. I have it good here. I'm going to try to go to college, go to school. But if I lived in, let's say, the Midwest or somewhere where I wasn't as fortunate or privileged, that I always felt that the military would be a good route for me to go. Right? If I had no
Hmm.
money in my pocket and let's say no role models either, I could jump into the military and instead of being an 18-year-old, kind of strolling the streets, I could be an 18-year-old with a little bit more guidance, or at least another year to 4 years of guidance, someone teaching me discipline. So I just never really thought about it that way until I started, speaking with more folks that did get into the military.
Yeah, and it gives you options. I mean, a great story here is that when I joined, last thing I ever wanted to do was go to college. Did
Mm-hmm.
not want to go to college. Hated
Mm-hmm.
school, had no idea, refused to. And when I was in there, in the Navy, our drill instructors are called company commanders. You got two of them assigned. You got my company commanders, but then there's other company commanders that they just process you in. The Navy, it's like your first week. They're processing you in paperwork and what you're signing up for.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this one company commander that I'd never seen before, but this guy was as mean as a rattlesnake. Not nice, screaming at us for everything, couldn't do anything right, which is typical basic, but I didn't know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm terrified. I'm 17. I look like I'm 12. Everyone goes, "Hey, does your mom know you're playing Navy?" So I'm there, and this guy comes in and is talking about filling out your GI Bill. And for the GI Bill, you had to give at the time like $100 a month out of your paycheck, which wasn't very much as an E1. And you put that in there, and then the Navy would, enroll you in the GI Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to go to school, but this guy was so mean. He goes, if you don't want to sign up for this because you're not going to college, that's fine. But raise your hand because we need to have a discussion. You know why I signed up for the GI Bill?
Right after that discussion.
Yeah. Do you know why I signed up?
Uh, no, enlighten me.
I just didn't. No, I didn't want to talk to him. I did not want to deal with him. Did not want to be yelled at on him. Did not want to do any more push-ups.
Wow.
So, so he was so intimidating. I signed up for the GI Bill, and glad I did because after my career in the military, I used that, and that was a huge help in me getting my accounting degree.
Yeah. Almost
And it
tough
provided
love in a
so
sense.
much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was. So if he's out there listening to this, and was it Great Lakes? Great Lakes, Illinois, pushing boots in April of 1989. Thank you, sir. I truly appreciate it, as does my family. But
Hopefully he's got a few of those over the years and many more,
oh, I know he did. I know he did.
Oh, that's awesome. And another thing, kind of just I made a little note on my notepad, but yeah, I know that you mentioned when you jumped in, you're 17, and you kind of went down this long story up until you turned 18, and I just thought that holy cow, you really are getting a whole bunch of experience coming from let's say an LA city kid who wasn't really sure what he wanted to do, jump into the military, and all of a sudden you're meeting all these people, you're starting to see what structure looks like, and it just makes me think of so and my brother David, but his
Yep.
godfather, who is still a close family friend of ours. he was actually served in Vietnam as an older fellow, served in Vietnam, and he was born and raised in South Carolina. Probably stopped going to school when he was 12 years old. Just no one really cared out there, and never left, never did anything until boom, he turned 17 and signs up for the military. And on the very next day, he's flying out to Guam and never been on an airplane before. And just had this, totally wild story. I'll have to figure out. I think he even did an episode with PBS. Try to find it for you. But I just thought it was so interesting because again, he had never even seen a plane before, and all of a sudden he's flying to a whole other country.
Well,
So it's just kind of wild to
and
think
that's
about
very
that.
common. Something along those lines.
Hmm.
And we can talk about some of the things I experienced in the military because I went to Maryland. After that, I ended up in Guam, like your
Hmm.
uncle, for a helicopter rescue squadron. But then after that, I went to airborne school on my way to the SEAL teams.
Hmm.
And the way airborne school went is that you went through. There's about 3 weeks of training, and I'll make it short. But at the end of the third week, it culminates in you doing 5 jumps. So there was
Hmm.
this one guy in my we called it your patrol is basically your squad is basically we call it a stick because it's a stick of jumpers that goes out. It's one group,
Hmm.
and I was a NC non-commissioned officer in charge of that stick, and we're all geared up, and we're inspected, and we do our first jump, and we come back, and we get done with all of our. I think it was like our third jump, and this good old boy from the Midwest looks at me and goes, there, petty officer. He goes, it's the damnedest thing. And you got to do 5 jumps to graduate. And I said, what's that? He goes, I've taken off in an aircraft 5 times, and I'm yet to land in one. Because every time he took off, he jumped out.
Yeah. Holy cow.
And he was really curious what it was like to land in an airplane.
Yeah.
And I just, by that time I was in my late 20s, but we never stopped to think about that. And I thought that
Hmm.
was really, I thought that was really cool story.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of similar stories of, let's say some folks who grew up in the Midwest and they have never even seen the ocean before, and then
Yeah.
immediately now they're, they want to be Navy SEALs, or they want to be in the Navy. So it's interesting to see that again, for a lot of folks, regardless of your kind of background or situation, if you don't have too many options, military is something that can really, at one, give you a lot of benefits, but two, give you a lot of experiences, which sometimes and often, most times, is a lot better.
Yeah. Or even if you just don't, I think the biggest thing for me was I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. And when
Yeah.
you don't know, and I've heard that again and again on different podcasts and different things that they were just lost.
Yeah.
And because what the military gave me was I came home, I left as a kid, I came home a man. People looked at me differently. I had
Hmm.
discipline. I had been through that. I mean, the things that happen like on the flight deck, the guys that move the aircraft around and are directing it on the flight deck, you have very little room, right?
Hmm.
And you'll have an aircraft within like inches of going over the side as they're
Hmm.
moving it around. And these kids are 19, I don't mean to say kids, but these young men, right?
Yeah.
Are 18, 19, 22 and everything that we do, whether it's parachuting or moving aircraft or whatever. I mean, on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, you can absolutely get killed
Hmm.
and you're within inches. I mean, think
Yeah.
about the Marines, the Army, right? Literally, you cannot purchase a weapon under 21, right? You can't purchase
Hmm.
a handgun, but they're giving these guys grenades, and it's that level of training and responsibility. And
Yeah.
because the biggest tragedy in the military and what we're trained isn't dying,
Hmm.
it's doing something stupid that gets somebody else killed.
Yeah.
Right, like that's the ultimate thing, and to learn that level of responsibility, and there's just something about being that 17-year-old kid. I was 17 when I came home from basic. I remember
Hmm.
being in my uniform, and the way everyone would look at me, and I went from oh just some being treated like some stupid kid to people respecting me.
Hmm.
That was just huge because I'd never had
Yeah.
that before, and so
Yeah, and there is something, thinking about like, let's say, child psychology. There's some sort of science behind if you can give people or give these children more responsibility or give these children more independence, they'll fail, but they're learning over each step, and the more that they fail, the more that they learn from those experiences, and hopefully don't make those same mistakes again. So it's essential for I hate to be a cliche, but like building a man or kind of becoming a man. So almost essential.
well, And I agree with you on that. One of the things too, though, is I love one of the things Anthony Robbins talks about the I don't know if you've heard about the six basic needs, and
I
it's
feel like I've heard of that. Yeah.
yeah. So there's certainty, right? Like or security, right?
Mm,
There's uncertainty, variety.
mm,
There's love or connection, right? There's significance, and then there's growth and contribution. And one of
mm,
the biggest things is those needs determine uh, why we do anything. And what
mm,
was interesting is that and with his training in psychology and the things that
mm,
he's researches is that he found is if you find something that meets one of those needs, one or two of those needs, you might do it. You
mm,
find it three, it'll become a habit. If you find something that meets all six of those needs,
mm,
you'll become addicted. For example, people talk about the different branches of the military, right? There's
mm,
really only two, the Army and the Navy, because the joke is that the Air Force is a union and the Marine Corps is a cult,
mm,
because Marines are so focused on this stuff and they're amazing. And
mm,
here's the thing is that think about it, right? The reason I love the military, and I still do to this day, and I highly recommend it, is one, it gave me certainty. I knew I'd have a place to sleep. I
mm.
knew I'd have a place to eat. When I didn't have money, right, I went back to the ship and I ate on the ship for free.
Yeah.
Right? Like I had a place to eat. So it provided certainty. It provided uncertainty. Why? Because I didn't know. And 4 days later, I was off the Desert Storm, right?
Mm,
Didn't know which port we were going to pull in. I had different things. It gave me that variety.
mm,
Significance. I became significant because I was a member of the United States military, and people looked at me different when
mm,
I walked down back home in a uniform.
mm.
And then you go connection, dude. I'm part of a huge brotherhood, right? In the U.S. military, so it gave
Yeah.
me four growth. It gave me opportunity to grow, and six, it gave me a chance to contribute and protect the whole United States.
Mm.
So
Gave you
it
purpose.
met right. It gave me purpose. So it met all of my needs.
Mm,
And so that's when you find someone like, oh, he's brainwashed. That's why it met all my needs because which of those did I have prior to leaving the house, right? I didn't have
mm,
security. I had variety at home, that's for sure. I knew both my parents adored and loved me with all their heart. So I
mm,
had that love and connection, but I wasn't significant. I wasn't growing. I wasn't contributing.
mm.
And so those are the things for the people that are finding something like young and they're missing, like I'm missing something, need to do something, like there's something pushing them.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy, and I'll butcher the quote, but he said, uh, 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 but he basically said, serving in the Navy. But this is really poignant and always, ask not what your country could do for you, right?
Mm,
Ask what you can do for your country. That's the contribution. And he goes, anyone that served in the military can say with great sense of pride that, hey, I served in the U.S. military because it's such a small group of people.
mm,
And that camaraderie even lasts years later. Like we can see each other a mile away, right? Oh, they were in the service. Oh, they
mm.
were in the service. And there's just this camaraderie of understanding that people that don't serve just won't get, and it's
Yeah.
okay. But
It's
it's
almost a
a
higher
brotherhood.
higher calling, right? You're part of something bigger than yourself. And what I always found interesting, and kind of again with this podcast, I'm really trying to emphasize like the or what I find valuable about, let's say, just America as a whole. Because if we think about, let's say, like American nationalism, I've heard some interesting arguments in terms of people from all sorts of different backgrounds and cultures, and we're both in San Diego. It's a really diverse environment. Yet a lot of times people would find patriotism or being American as the uniting factor from all these different backgrounds and different thought processes. And it's true because you're out in this environment, and if you can say, okay, well, the guy across the street looks completely different from me and acts completely different from me, but we're both American. Again, it really just I found as a very uniting factor that I just never really thought about until recently.
Well, yeah, but there's also the pluses of all those experiences of all those
Oh,
types of different people. I mean, the Navy is the only place where you can have a group of guys, right?
mm-hmm,
That you've got some guy from the deep south, right, learning to make Indian food, while you've got a Filipino guy learning the line dance from the
mm-hmm,
Philippines, right?
mm-hmm,
And just everything, and we're all brothers and sisters, right? It
mm-hmm,
has like It's just not seen. And that diversity and that experience is what makes it funny,
Hmm.
fun, but also it's all those skill sets of what they've done. You bring those types of brains and ideas and thoughts together,
Hmm.
you're going to get something much different. And the American people have always rallied, whether it was when Pearl Harbor was bombed,
Hmm.
right? Or
Hmm.
9/11. That's when everyone came together. That's when you saw people on 9/11, helping strangers, pulling them in off the streets to
Hmm.
just help them and do whatever and unified. And I just right now what I've seen a lot of is unfortunately because it's been so long since 9/11
Hmm.
is that there's the difference, not what brings us together, not how we're alike, but it's the
Yeah.
focus on, oh, well, what's in it for me? But I have
Hmm.
never been happy, and I learned this in the military too, but I've never been happy when I've been focusing on me,
Hmm.
but I've always been happy to see focusing on someone else. So,
Hmm.
for example, the helping someone else that's homesick or forgetting someone, or when I need money and I really need money, do you know what I do? I go find someone that needs money more than me and I give them some.
I like
Now that
that.
might sound, but it's just like something else, right? If you want, you get in life what you put out.
Yeah.
So if you're at a bar and you want someone to punch you, you know what you need to do? Take a swing
Punch
at
in.
someone. I guarantee you it'll come back.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing with kindness or
Hmm.
friendship or money.
Yeah.
And the military was a big thing on that. It was just, it's the we principle versus the I principle. And the second we take the I off of ourselves and put it on others, like you're doing with this channel,
Hmm.
that's when just things that you can't explain happen. Like,
Yeah. It's almost like that
that
institution aspect where, some people go to their local churches, some people try to get involved in their local communities. And, there's probably some similar kind of aspects of gain in that. And I even know, like, again, for myself, I feel like I've, gotten at least myself, stable enough. It's never perfect, but, I feel like I've gotten myself together enough to where now I want to start, being able to speak with people like yourself and try to do some good out in the world, right? And especially like try to mentor those around me as much as I can. So I
yeah,
definitely hear you there.
yeah. And I think the other big thing I learned in the military that was huge is that, and this kind of went on, is just the higher calling or purpose, right? It's just not
Yeah,
to let the other person down.
yeah.
It's not to one of the interesting thing I learned supporting the Navy SEALs. Once again, clarify, I was not a Navy SEAL.
Hmm.
But working with them and supporting them is that I was never the fast. I was a kid in school where everyone would line up for the sport. It was kickball, and in my day was the big thing, right? They'd line up for kickball, and they'd all
Hmm.
pick sides, and they'd always come down to there was Billy and the girl, and they'd always pick the girl before they'd pick me. I was not an athlete. No, not at all. Not good for the way that I felt about myself, mind you,
Hmm.
but just not that. But I persisted. And if you're persisting in the military and wanting it and figuring it out, you will get there. And
Hmm.
what's interesting in the SEAL teams is that what they respected more than anything else was persistence. When people
Hmm.
got their support guys, they didn't care about your rank. The rank didn't really mean anything. But it was like, how did you learn? Did you contribute? Did you give to the
Yeah.
team? Would you quit? Were you a person that they'd go on a 8 mile run with the whole, or a 6 mile, 5 mile run with the whole, 5 miles probably more realistic, the whole team, right?
Hmm.
And because you're a regular fleet sailor and you only have to run a mile and a half every 6 months to pass your military fitness exam, do you
Hmm.
just run 3/4 of a mile out, 3/4 of a mile back? I'm like, no. Like they'd be done with the bus and go, okay, Bill, get on the bus. I'm like, nope, got to finish my 6 miles. I'm good.
Hmm.
You know, I just wouldn't quit, and that's how you got the respect.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating to me
Ownership.
about yeah, but what's fascinating is the guys that got through SEAL training, they always say, and the ones that don't, the difference are they can never tell. It's the
Hmm.
guys that just refuse to quit.
Yeah. Well, it's
And I
grit.
think,
What was I telling you about?
yeah,
There's a
a
success
book.
psychology.
Mhm,
Oh, go
mhm.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I know exactly where you're going.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say we may have even chatted about this, but yeah, there's a success psychologist out there, Angela Duckworth, who did a lot of studying on the topic of grit. And I know that in the beginning of her book, she talks about how she was working with the what is it, West Point, the military
Yep.
academy.
Yep.
Highly competitive. You're getting the best and the brightest, students coming in, and it's best and the brightest in the country. Yet, a handful of them still drop out. So she was trying to figure out, okay, well, all these kids are testing fantastic, but there's clearly some sort of common denominator between the ones who stay versus the ones who end up dropping out. And she boiled it down to grit. And she's got her own kind of formula behind what grit is. But it's basically that ability to get yourself to kind of persevere and keep going and push through. And that tends to be one of the better predictors of success in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the big things the military teaches you. It
Mm-hmm.
teaches you grit because you're not allowed to just quit. Oh, I quit. Well, you're under contract. You quit. You go to
Mm-hmm.
the brig or do whatever before you get out, right?
Mm-hmm.
You you make a commitment. You stick to it. You get through it. You learn how to build a team, and if you're fortunate enough to have good leaders, you learn to lead. I won't say
Mm-hmm.
all everyone serves as a good leader because that'd just be a lie, right?
Yeah.
There's the people that go, "Oh, I'm this rank," and they flip their collar with a rank insignia. So you have to do what I say,
Mm-hmm.
versus the people that want to follow you, just between a manager and a leader. But
Yeah.
for the most part, as a general rule of thumb in the military, is that you learn what camaraderie really is. You learn how to form those teams,
Mm-hmm.
and then you learn grit. And if you could take anything from the military, I think the biggest things I took away was just not giving up, having people that are counting on me, and being able to form my own group. And that group could be people that do a same profession as you. That could be a professional organization. That could be just a tight group of friends from high school that no matter what, you're there for each other. But then also being a leader. And the one thing that leaders provide is certainty. If you're in charge and things go wrong, right, you still have to figure out what to do because people are looking to you. And it teaches you how to do that and teaches you to make your own decisions. And sometimes you make good decisions and sometimes you don't. And there's consequences to both. But I think those are the biggest things that I got out of the military.
You were saying that the military teaches you X, Y, Z, and then grit to kind of help.
Yeah,
Also teaching grit.
yep. And I'd finish that thought there.
Okay.
Reality is the military the teaches you leadership,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how to provide certainty to the people that you're leading and make a decision and suffer the consequences, positive or negative, right?
Yeah.
But really, to go in there to provide that for your men and women and to care for them.
Mm-hmm.
It teaches you grit and it teaches you to build a team around you. And those are the
Mm-hmm.
things that are amazing. I mean, when you and I met, I'm like, hey, this is a sharp guy, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
someone that I
Wasn't just
want to
my
know.
military haircut.
It wasn't just well, it was a good start. But but yeah, so it was forming that team around, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really what life's about. It's getting to that point of being able to persevere no matter what and
Yeah.
connect with people. I hear that one of the biggest challenges with for younger people today is just feeling lonely and
Yeah.
not connected. And that doesn't happen from playing games together. And don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, I like to game with my friends as much as the next guy.
Yeah.
My I'll date myself. My first game was an Atari 2600, so I'm OG. I'm original gamer. But but on a serious note, it's when you're in those tough situations. If you look at the toughest times of your life, who
Yeah.
was there to get you through that? And it was building that team. And I still have friends that I served with my very first tour of command.
Mm-hmm.
One of my buddies, Dave, who's a battalion fire chief, who I talk to him every few months. We still talk to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we never missed a beat. I've got, friends I've known for 40 some odd years,
Yeah.
30 some odd years from that. But it's just, if you don't know where you're going or what you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great place. And the other thing that I think a lot of people think is that they see these people going to war and they're like, oh, they're getting hurt, they're getting killed. Yes, that's part of being a service member in the military, but that's not
Mm-hmm.
every part. When I joined, I didn't want to. I'm like, well, if I can save lives instead of take lives, I'd rather do that. So I became a
Mm-hmm.
parachute rigger because when someone ejects out of an aircraft, someone's got to save their life with the parachute. There's definitely roles that serve that aren't as combat related, and you
Hmm.
still get all the benefits there. You can still serve a higher cause. So it's not just uh, uh, the
The guy on the
shooting.
front lines. Yeah.
Right, right. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
technical jobs, and there's some amazing things. I mean, the security guys. I mean, Space Force has started
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
and that's very technical. That's cybersecurity. That's all of those things.
Yeah.
Uh, you need a high level security clearance, and the only thing I can advise people is that uh, stay away and avoid hard drugs at all costs. Those are the things that kind of mess up high security.
Hmm.
But if you have had challenges or whatever, go talk to your recruiter. Finish school. Stay
Yeah.
in there. I know it sucks, and I know I'm a hypocrite because I didn't do it. Okay, but I
Hmm.
eventually had to get my high school diploma when I was in.
Hmm.
But stay, and then it just gives you options
Yeah.
instead of just floundering. Like you can sit there and flounder, and oh, I'm going to work at Jack in the Box. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's not
Yeah.
what you want to do, and you
Yeah.
don't know, it gives you just gives you options.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think for me, I've always gone down the route of if I ever meet a young adult who, let's say, doesn't know what they want to do, seems a little lost themselves, and maybe even feels that they don't have a ton of options for themselves. One, I always recommend going down either the community college route. Like that's something I did myself. I jumped in and had to figure out a lot of kind of what classes I had to take and why. But I jammed it out in 2 years, and that opens up doors for you getting out into different universities, right? So if your goal is to get a
absolutely.
bachelor's degree, community college is a absolutely awesome route to go, and it's financially feasible as well. But of course, there are people out there who, let's say, they can't go down that route for whatever reason, or maybe they don't know how, or they don't feel confident in it. The military is a fantastic option for them because, again, I mean,
Yeah.
even like chatting with you, not only are you getting these, great experiences that can help improve you as an individual and give you perspective in life, but it opens up all these different doors afterwards, right? And maybe you'd rather make that career decision when you're 22, 24 instead of 17 or 18.
Mhm.
So all very good options.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing too, though, is because I did that route after I got out of the military.
Hmm.
I think the biggest thing though is that I mean I wish I would have known when I was younger, is that find somebody
Hmm.
that anybody, someone that has a life that you want and saying, hey, how did you get there? What
Yep.
did you do? Because most people, I love the saying that in your 20s you worry about what people think about you. In your
Hmm.
30s you don't care. But in your 40s you realize nobody was thinking about you. They were thinking about how people were thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
Okay? And there's so much knowledge and so much experience out here. And you're a great student. I mean, when you and I talk, both of us are like wanting to learn from each other because we have
Hmm.
different paths and different experiences. And there's an age gap here, but I know there's so much I can still learn from you.
Hmm.
Find somebody that's doing what you want to do and ask them how they got there. Someone that you admire, how you got there, how you did that, right?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to, talk to me about that? All you got to do is ask
Yeah.
because you've got nothing to lose. And
Absolutely.
that's the biggest thing is that just ask. 'Cause people are there. There's not one person I know that I would turn down
Hmm.
that came to me and asked that. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of people out there, as open as you and I are to being mentors. Because I think that there's definitely some sort of pay it forward type of maybe reward or fulfillment that we get from it. But we all
well,
went down that route, and I think like anyone I talk to who's even graduating college and they're asking for career advice, they don't know what to do. Maybe they want to become a nurse. Go find a nurse and talk to that nurse. And odds are they figured out what hoops to jump through, what applications you got to fill out, what hospitals to avoid. And they're going to know more than me, but I can at least tell them go find a nurse. So I think same thing applies kind of across decisions.
yep. And keep in mind, it helps those people because remember we talked about the six basic needs. It lets
Hmm.
that person contribute and give back, and
Hmm.
that makes them feel good because they've grown and done everything. And
Hmm.
people love to talk about what they're passionate about. Like I'm
Hmm.
passionate about skydiving. You come up and want to talk skydiving, dude. We will talk all day long, whether you got more skydives or less skydives than me, right?
Yeah.
It's that thing. But the most important thing is make sure you connect with somebody And I
Yeah.
don't care if it's with an uncle. I don't care if it's someone that you know. And you can say, hey, I'm interested. I want to know. I want to hear your story.
Hmm.
I'm curious. Who does everyone want to talk about? Themselves.
Yeah. True.
And
Absolutely.
so just ask them questions
Hmm.
saying, I'm curious, how did you do that? Would you show me? And I think your listeners would be absolutely surprised who says yes.
Yeah. I was surprised myself, and it's
Yeah.
opened up a ton of doors over time. And it's almost being, having the humility to, let's say, ask the dumb questions, right? Because you ask enough dumb questions, and all of a sudden you don't have those questions anymore, and now you're not so dumb, right?
Yeah, and nobody was born an admiral,
Yeah.
right? Nobody was born whatever. They had to learn that. They were
Yeah.
coached. Even if they were born into privilege,
Yeah.
you don't think their parents taught them and coached them,
Hmm.
right? But most people aren't, and most people want to help. All they need to see is that you're hungry. And
Yeah.
I think and so that's one of the really big uh that's just a big point I wanted to get to.
Yeah. Yeah, and and of course, you and I have talked about this a lot, but for me, any adult I talk to, especially ones who are in the workforce and trying to figure out how to, better manage either, how they conduct themselves in the workforce or even manage their own mind, I always recommend Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Great book recommendation. And what's funny is
Phenomenal book.
over time, I've even started to say, okay, well, let's say you're, 15 years old, okay, maybe Extreme Ownership, maybe, a little bit of a more difficult book. But for anyone who's a younger adult or teenager, I really recommend looking up the book Grit, the one that we talked about earlier, because I think that puts kind of real life examples in terms of, okay, well, if I push myself just a little bit harder, how many more doors will be open? So, just a major takeaway for anyone listening. Those are two excellent books. One of the other kind of main themes that's popping out to me that I made note on is just, find someone to talk to, find someone older. Wisdom typically comes with age, not always, but, you can definitely ask someone, what their experiences were and maybe even what they would do if they were in your shoes.
Mm,
So major takeaways. And then, but Bill, I did want to ask you, maybe as a good kind of place to wrap up on the recording, would be
mm,
if you're talking to anyone who is at the end of high school, they don't know what to do, you're recommending at least exploring the military. How could they do that? Is that something where they should find someone in the military to talk to? I know sometimes or at least when I was in high school, sometimes they'd have military people go to the high school and try to shake hands at lunch and talk to people, which I honestly think is a really good thing to do. But
mm.
curious what your 2 cents would be.
I would say find somebody that you know and trust and see
Hmm.
who they know in their family or
Hmm.
friends that would talk to you. Absolutely, the people in high school and stuff there, military recruiters are phenomenal, but they
Hmm.
still have sales quotas, and I'm
True.
not banging on them. So you just want to make sure you get a straight up go online, find somebody that in their military profile on LinkedIn says, "Hey, I was there." I'm like, "Hey, I'm thinking of joining. Can you talk to me about this?"
Yeah.
Is one of the is one of the biggest things that I would recommend, and have them go with you to the recruiter, and
Hmm.
and discuss your options, and going from there. And it's okay if you use the military just as a path to getting your degree, or just a path to learning how to be a mechanic. I know in the Navy we've got CBs, right, which
Hmm.
are construction battalions, so they build whole cities out of the middle of nowhere, so you can learn to
Hmm.
be a contractor or what have you. There's a million things, but explore what your options are,
Yeah.
and then find a military mentor and ask them questions, but don't
Yeah.
go it alone. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think that's one of the big things. And I know there was one thing you had in the notes we had talked a little bit prior,
Hmm.
is that was it? Do you want to go on that one final question about?
Yeah. I kind of selfishly took that over myself in terms of the go find a mentor. But yeah, with each end of the episode, I definitely whoever I'm talking to, there's a great bulk of wisdom that we're getting from you. But what would be your single piece of advice to either young adults or people who are looking to improve upon their lives moving forward?
Look at what you're focusing on.
Hmm.
One of the things I love most. and once again, I'm going back to a lot of Tony Robbins stuff because I found some phenomenal things that changed my life, is that the most important thing is managing our state, like how we're feeling right now. And
Hmm.
that's determined on what we focus on, the meaning we put behind it, and the words
Hmm.
that we use. And if we change any of those, a lot of people change their state by doing drugs
Yeah.
or alcohol or playing games to escape or being on their phone.
Hmm.
But what I'm saying is that if we really look at something that, like, let's say uh, something bad happens, right? I got nowhere to live. I got no money. I don't know what this or that, right? What does this mean? Well, this
Hmm.
means I got to find my own way. Or this guy broke up with me. Well, you know what? That means, right? That means that person wasn't meant for me, and it's leaving
Yeah.
room for someone else. And focus really on what you want. The biggest thing is that, why are things happening to me? This victim mentality is what drives me insane, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, well, this happened to me. It's like, great. What does this mean? If I get knocked down, it means I got to get up and go again.
Yeah.
It means I got to do again. And one of my favorites, and I'll stop with this, but this was amazing. I don't know if you've ever read The Man in the Arena from Theodore Roosevelt,
I've
but
not.
but this is like, I actually have it framed on my wall. It's got a gladiator and arena, but this is something to really realize when you're going out there. You're gonna fail, I guarantee it.
Hmm.
But it's about getting up. So
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt put this in a speech, and I'll share it with you. It says, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles,
Hmm.
or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose
Hmm.
face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again. And because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with his old and timid souls, who knew neither victory nor defeat." Theodore Roosevelt.
Wow. I do love that. And I wish you could see my video, but I was shaking my head the whole time in confidence that I appreciate that. And that gives me a good idea. Maybe I'll start asking people for their what they feel their most powerful quote is, because I
Yeah,
like that type of stuff. And especially in terms of, I mean, I myself, I'm a big Jordan Peterson guy, and he talks
yeah,
a lot about, dragons, monsters, and men. And the fact that, growing up a man, growing up a human, you're going to have to endure these monsters that eventually you'll learn how to slay. But being able to overcome that and get back on your feet is what's most important. So a lot of overlap there.
yeah,
It must be a human nature truism in a sense.
yeah, yeah. And I think the biggest thing, I mean, the person I want to talk to isn't the guy who's the uh, I mean, I hope everyone gets something, right? But it's not the guy
Hmm.
who thinks went well, or the captain of the football team.
Hmm.
I'm talking to the guy who struggles in school, who was picked on, picked last for sports. The
Hmm.
girls didn't care much for him. What I can tell you is this, dude: it can get better, and what you're changing can, when what you focus on can change.
Hmm.
And it's the beginning of every great success story of where you are. Nobody wants to hear about the person who has it all, who gets more.
Hmm.
But that's the beginning of every great success story. Love the movie Rudy. If you haven't seen that, it's a
I
phenomenal
do like
movie
that one.
about that. Yeah. So this is for that guy,
Yeah.
right? Because I am that guy. I'm just an older version of that guy.
Hmm.
And so, dude, just get up and keep getting after it. You will find a way. You will figure it out. Ask for help. My mom gave me the best quote ever, and I love this. And she's been able to do phenomenal things. She says, when you run into a roadblock or a problem,
Hmm.
go to someone. Like, I was failing a class in college. Like, I had no way I knew how I'd pass it. And she goes, ask somebody saying, oh, how can I get there? How can I pass this class? How, who do you know? Like, I can't help you. She goes, great. If someone says they can't help you, going, well, who do you know can help me along my way?
Hmm.
Who do you know can make that call? Who do you know can do that? If you want a better, if you want better things in life, you have to ask better questions.
Hmm.
Who can help me? What can I do? Not why does it happen to me? So
Yeah.
I don't want to go on a long diatribe, but I'm
No, I
just
love that.
yeah,
Control your
let's go.
controllables. I say that about 100 times each hour. So
Well, well, because everything's your fault.
Totally.
And
Extreme ownership. You have to think about it like that way if you want to take firm grasp of your own situation and make a change.
well, right. Oh, I mean, well, because here's the whole thing, right? Like I could blame a bunch of stuff on my parents and this and that, but I heard a great thing that Tony Robbins said once again. Uh, uh, it's not the only fountain I drink out of, there's a lot of great stuff
Hmm.
from him. And he says, well, if you blame everything on your parents, you have to give them credit too, all the credit too,
Hmm.
because that's who you are. And
Love
so
that.
if I take responsibility for everything in my life, then I can change it. But if it's everyone else's fault, then I can't change anything.
Hmm. I
And
love that.
so anyway, but I really appreciate you having me on here. It's been an absolute honor.
Well, I appreciate
And
you. Thank you,
thank you.
Bill. Yeah, no, and we'll definitely have to coordinate more of these. I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, so I look forward to having more of these conversations, whether recorded or not. But I really appreciate your time. Appreciate all the advice you're sharing to people who may be listening, and appreciate everyone who is taking the time to listen and hopefully trying to better themselves. So, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
So